Hello, friends. Welcome back to No Cap Room here on the Ball Don't Lie podcast network at Yahoo Sports. My name is Jake Fischer. I'm the senior NBA reporter at Yahoo Sports, and I'm joined, as always, by my man, your man, everyone's man, fresh back from the NBA Finals, senior NBA writer at Yahoo Sports, Dan Devine. What's up?
Jake, in the words of the poet Warren G., the game don't wait. You get back from the finals, you do a load of laundry, and then you're right into the draft and free agency. We go snap, 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 right back into it. So I was thinking about singing the Nate Dogg hook of the game don't wait, but maybe we don't need that with my voice sort of a lower baritone, but not nearly at the Nate Dogg level. So maybe that'll be a deleted feature for somebody else down the line.
The game don't wait. I mean, literally, when the finals end, the first question on a lot of people's minds around the league was, hey, what's Denver going to do about that Bruce Brown fella?
Yeah,
Someone pretty integral to that team, player option. What's he good? I was like, man, could we not just allow the Nuggets this moment? I mean, I thought I was being respectful waiting till today, Thursday, to drop my latest notebook of hearings. I wanted to give Denver, I guess, maybe it's a little disrespectful on the day of the championship parade, but Jokic didn't want to be there. So, I mean, it felt like fair game.
That's right. There's a parade in one city, and then in 29 others, everyone's wondering what the hell's going on. So let's start moving our attention into that.
I just wanted, before we get into all the offseason stuff, because on today's show, it's the offseason for sure. If you thought we'd be taking a breath between news cycles, you haven't been paying attention at all. But before we do that, one moment, I want to give some audio space to the champs. And then I'll start just by asking you, like, you wrote a ton of words about it for sure. But I mean, a great post-game sceney thing about the champagne being popped and KCP in the locker room and all that jazz. What was the best, funniest, most memorable, like in the trope of, your editor says you go on site and the lead, you don't know what it should be. Well, what's the best thing you saw out there? Funny, whatever the, category is, what is the best thing that maybe even didn't make it to print from that post-game celebration and just the overall scene in Denver?
Well, the first off, I mean, it wasn't so much something that you saw or heard as much as it was something that you smelled. It was pretty much right after the Nuggets won. Some things were being put in the air in Denver, true to form and as it goes, and
in the stadium.
Yeah, I don't think there was a whole lot of policing
Nice.
of that in that moment. But
I did get a text message from leadership at Yahoo about a similar picture I posted after the Philadelphia Eagles won the NFC Championship game. I just want to say.
So I was not partaking. And actually, the other thing was in the locker room, someone with the Nuggets was talking to me and another reporter and was like, all right, the party foul. Neither of you guys have a beer. And I'm like, well, we don't work for you guys. And like, we also have to still do work. And there was some negotiation about whether or not we should be allowed to do that or we should go ahead and do that. We both declined, citing professionalism and decorum, and did not go do that. But it was the vibe was pretty raucous, pretty fun. And you sort of get the feeling or a better sense of just how many freaking people work for the teams, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because you think about the players and like the front of the coaching staff. And then you get in the locker room and there's like 75 people that you probably couldn't pick out of a lineup, or that many fans would have no idea who they are, but they have also been part of this process for months, years, however long. And so when the bottles all get popped, a lot of them are not by the players. It's a ton of other people that are also having that big, exhale moment. So that was pretty rad to be around, get to see up close.
I mean, there's like travel secretaries and like the assistant to the GM, who's literally like your standard executive office assistant who just takes inbound calls, because there's not just like NBA trade talk coming into Calvin Booth, to use the Denver, continued example. Like, there's also corporate sponsors and like business things that like have to get sent to Calvin Booth, that like there's a person in charge of like that person's also living and dying with the Denver Nuggets regular season and playoffs for sure. So I think that's kind of the one thing I want to touch on. Like, coaching friends of mine always say how no matter what, it comes down to the players. And a really cool moment that you, Dan Devine, weren't privileged enough to see because you were in person. ESPN caught it on the broadcast in like the early chaos on the court. Popeye Jones, a longtime assistant coach who spent a bunch of years in Indiana. I believe he was in Philly before Denver, used to play in the league. Um, Really respected guy around the
Hmm.
NBA. And he went up to Jokic with legitimate tears in his eyes and just said, "Hey, thank you. Thank you."
Oh, that's cool.
It was a really cool moment that I think really summed up kind of what you're saying too about how many people like their hopes and dreams are wrapped up into something that just kind of gets boiled down on the surface to like, can the Heat stop the Jokic Murray two-man game? Like
Right.
that is a crowning achievement for so many people that I just wanted to take a couple of heartbeats to give a shout out and acknowledge here on No Cap Room. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, absolutely the way to do it. Like the whole point of everything we're about to talk about is to get to the point we just exited, right? It's like
Yeah.
everything that's about to happen in terms of, free agency and trades and the draft and everything, it's all on the off chance that someday you can get to that place. So it's worth remembering how special that place is, and why everyone's going to work their asses off to get there.
Yeah. But if you're a fan of MTV's The Challenge, like I am, you'll know the second they hoist that trophy, the second a champion is crowned, the next season begins. And it's a wonder if Bradley Beal is someone that will be able to help swing a title. Maybe is it to the degree of which like Anthony Davis helped LeBron and them to 1-2 punch their way to the 2020 championship? Is it more along the lines of Aaron Gordon being the third number 3.5 banana to Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray? No one around the league, from what I've spoken to, has like a super strong grasp of how to value Bradley Beal
Mm,
in this trade landscape, as he and his agent Mark Bartelstein and the new president of the Washington Wizards, Michael Winger, are going to be working together here to potentially move Brad. Now, this has been an ongoing thing for like 3 years of whether or not Bradley Beal is going to request a trade. And I think it got most serious, if I remember correctly. I mean, the most serious I remember reporting on it was the summer of 21 when Russell Westbrook requested a trade and got moved to the Lakers. A lot of that I remember writing at the time. The Westbrook stuff happened the next day. I remember writing at Bleacher Report the day before that Brad was requesting a trade, in large part because he knew Russell Westbrook was, or Brad was considering requesting a trade, in large part because he knew Westbrook was considering requesting a trade.
right.
So I mean, and then last year the whole lead up to, will they move him before he signs this big extension that is now hanging over potential trade talks right now. So I do want to say that, like, just like in the past when it's been an if maybe we'll see what happens situation, there still is not a guarantee Bradley Beal gets traded this summer
Right.
before the
Right.
draft. It certainly seems like this is the time. Like, it seems like they're working in concert to try to make this thing happen. But there's a reason why when the reporting first came out about this situation, it was definitely phrased as if a deal presents itself, or if the Wizards really do decide to go into a rebuild, because there's no chance that there's a chance that a team doesn't end up bringing the actual price point that the Wizards value him at. And like Kristaps Porzingis, by various accounts, is starting to reconsider whether or not to pick up his option. And if he's back on the books for $36 million, that's a whole nother piece to factor into a potential rebuilding situation. So I'm just gonna stop my long intro here because there's a lot more to say, to shut up and allow you to get a couple of intro thoughts here. Because outside of the contract and whatever, just as a pure basketball player, if healthy, how would you, Dan Devine, be considering what Bradley Beal changing teams and what he could ultimately swing for some would be potential, contender compared to the Denver Nuggets that we just saw?
Yeah, I think that's it's so hard sometimes to divorce contract from player because of the, we think about these things from like a fantasy GM perspective, and the reporting on a lot of it is about what this means for a team's cap structure and how else they can add talent and yada yada yada, especially in an environment where like the new CBA is coming in, and if you have like a guy on a giant contract who's not providing like MVP level value on that contract, then that makes building everything else harder, and so on and so forth. But if you haven't paid a lot of attention to the Wizards over the last couple of years, and I wouldn't blame you if you hadn't, because the Wizards have been kind of like, they're just there for the last couple of years for the most part. It's you might sort of find yourself wondering like why we're making such a big deal out of Bradley Beal. Like, he's averaged 23 points a game over the last couple of seasons. He's like a 3-time All-Star, but hasn't made it in a couple of years. Like, where's the value proposition here? And I think the hope is, if you are one of these teams that would potentially be in the mix for him, you're looking at, well, the guy he was 2-3 years ago, where he averaged 30 plus a game on pretty good efficiency, able to be a 3-level scorer, handling the ball, getting downhill to the rim, finishing in traffic, but also the catch and shoot 3-point game, being able to shoot off movement, being able to get to the free throw line, being able to get to the mid range, like all those sorts of things, advancing as a playmaker as well. In the absence of John Wall, when they needed more shot creation for others, he kind of kept building and building out, fastening more aspects onto his game. And you're thinking like the hope would be to take the guy he was as a number 2 player off of Wall in the first kind of half of his career, a guy who averaged, by the way, like 25 points a game in playoff runs. And like, they never made it past the second round, those Wizards teams, but he was absolutely a like legit playoff guy.
He had some badass moments in that series against Boston that went 7. I forget what year it was, because if it was pre-pandemic at this point, like,
I think it was
idea.
I think it was 2017, and then there was also the previous year where, if not for Wall breaking his hand, they maybe take out the Hawks like that before the Hawks get to the conference finals against that LeBron Cavs team that just absolutely waxed them. But they were for real, those teams, and Beal was a major reason why. And so you're saying, well, he's shown he can be a I don't know, like mini Harden-ish kind of number 1 offensive engine on a decent offense. He's shown he can be a number 2 on pretty good to, maybe slightly above that teams. If you asked him to do a little bit less on the offensive end, surrounded him with better talent in a better situation, and he's more of your number 2 finisher, but a guy who can give you some of that ball handling, some of that shot creation, some of that catch and shoot, targeting, all that kind of stuff. And if he's not carrying the entire offense, maybe that allows more, his defense plays up, because he certainly got the, like the size, 6'4", 6'5", strong, good hands. He's got the ability to be better on defense than he's been the last couple of years in a situation in Washington where they're kind of haven't really been playing for much of consequence. And so he hasn't really had to lock in and drive winning in quite the same way. The hope is you put all the best parts of that together and you get a guy who is like a fringe all NBA player, like a top 20-ish player in the league when everything's going right, because he can be that. We just haven't seen a whole lot of it recently. And then the question is like, in what market or in what environment would you play up to that level? And if you can get that, if that player is available to you, maybe in certain circumstances it winds up being worth the money. But that's you have to be able to evaluate in your organization, your front office. Can we get that guy out of him? Can we get like the best of all worlds out of him here? And can we get him for, the next 3 years of his prime or whatever to make it worth our while?
All right. So with your expert analysis out there now, let's kind of take that into the trade marketplace here, because the no trade clause is the biggest deal off the jump. And I honestly hadn't thought about this until, this is why you make the calls, folks, until I talked to a couple of team people who shared a similar fear. There are many fears about the length of the deal, especially now. I'll tell you what, man, like regardless of subject matter, it's been a clear theme in conversations I've had for the last week that like every single team is scared of the second tax apron, and it's going to effectively be a hard cap. And this idea of a frozen pick happening at some point down the line in the future because you're in that, danger zone, like limiting your flexibility. Like, I don't know how many teams are going to be passing the second apron, like, ever, let alone this year. Like, I mean, that's just, maybe this is all just people having an initial reaction, but people are just afraid right now of what the idea of taking on a 4-year, $200 million, price tag on Bradley Beal will be, especially with his durability issues, but especially because look at the Westbrook trade with the Lakers. Look at James Harden being dealt from Houston to Brooklyn. Like, sometimes you got to move off of these deals that you think are going to save your franchise or move you forward anyway. And if you put yourself into the position of having to trade him again with a no trade clause, like, if you're trading him again, obviously things are worse than they appear right now. So you're kind of marrying yourself no matter what to that contract. And he's got a player option on the 4th year, which, like, right now seems like he's turning 30 this month. So he'll be 34 this time 4 years from now. Like, man, just a big thing to put onto your books. So Miami's definitely out there. Keep hearing Milwaukee too, but the Milwaukee thing I'm raising an eyebrow at, because just mathematically feels like it has to include Chris Middleton, and by all accounts, Middleton and the Bucks are hoping to find a new deal. He has a player option himself, and, like, if he's going to get traded to Washington, that's going to require him to opt in and a lot of cooperation with his representation to get that thing done.
Well, one thing I would say, though, is if it's not Middleton, then it's pretty much got to be Drew Holiday. If it's not Middleton, because Drew has another year on the deal and he's not up, he wouldn't have to, like, renegotiate and extend in or something like that. So then you're looking at something more like Drew and, like, I don't know, Grayson Allen's $9 million expiring as sort of the ballast there. But both of those are really tough sells,
Yeah, I would be floored if, I 100% see the higher ceiling of bringing Bradley Beal in instead of Chris Middleton, because if you're concerned about Bradley Beal's durability issues, then, like, Chris Middleton has the same exact, red flag, if not more. Or what's the TikTok term? Beige flag? Is that what it is? I feel like red flag would mean, like, stay away. You're not going to trade for the guy. Whatever is one step below red flag.
Right.
So in this particular circumstance, like, Middleton has not been a reliable second banana, even though he's been truly an all-star scorer and pretty much the Bucks, like, best, like, in space creator in the postseason when healthy, but that hasn't been the case. Outside of those two teams, the Knicks are a team I'm going to keep an eye on for sure, but I don't know how many other teams are going to be so eager to get into the Bradley Beal sweepstakes, where, like, Boston, I'm being told no. Philadelphia, I'm being told no. Is there something else that's going to pop up? Probably there always is, but I say all this to say, like, there's probably going to be a limited field here. And I'm skeptical that Washington, outside of something where if the Wizards want to favor picks, then maybe they can take back Julius Randle and Evan Fournier's salary, like I wrote today, and get back, like, 2 or 3, or I don't know how many picks that works out, but one executive is pointing out to me, like, sometimes, like, when the Celtics traded KG and Paul Pierce to Boston, everyone looks at that crazy price tag, but they got a couple more picks back for taking back bad long-term salaries, like Gerald Wallace and Keith Bogans, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, from the Nets in that deal.
From the Nets. So if the Knicks, in theory, are getting off Julius Randle's, again, this is just completely me trying to spell out options here. But I do think New York is a team that, they clearly have the assets and they have young talent if they want to put that on the table too. But you're also going to have to send out big salary no matter what. So someone like Evan Fournier, completely going, out to Washington's way. And that's a thing that New York would have to probably compensate any team for taking on Fournier. So if the Wizards want to go a draft pick route, then that's fine. If they want to try to prioritize blue chip prospects, I don't know if they're getting any better than Tyler Hero or, the best that New York has to offer of the RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, Emmanuel Quickly trio that got brought up left and right. I mean, you throw in Quentin Grimes too. I mean, he's apparently a darling of Tom Thibodeau. So
Right.
I just, when Kawhi went on the block in 2019, he only went for DeMar DeRozan and Jakob Poeltl in a first round pick.
Right.
I think Beal's value will end up being something way closer to that than what Kevin Durant went for Phoenix, what Donovan Mitchell went to Cleveland, what Rudy Gobert went for Minnesota.
Which, yeah, I mean, and the thing that makes me think is we maybe didn't see Toronto as a big suitor right away in that Kawhi sweepstakes. You wonder if the price tag winds up being comparatively lower or surprisingly low to some, for a player of Beal's caliber. Does that open the door for somebody else that we are not considering? But you're right. I mean, I sort of like went, just go through the standings, start thinking about who might make sense and in what capacity. The only other thing I could think of was if you are a who wants to pay, who wants to compete for a championship, who's willing to pay through the nose for it, and we'll deal with it later. And where is there a relationship? I was like, maybe Winger's old buddies, the Clippers, and if the move forward point for Winger and company in the new regime in Washington is less like we need to get as many picks out of this as possible. It's more what flexibility can we give ourselves by breaking up that one huge contract into maybe several expirings or multiple more flexibility. Do you look at something like Eric Gordon and Nick Batum or Robert Covington and like Terrence Mann as where you got like a couple of big expirings that then clear your books out, plus a player you can put into the mix and see if there's something of value there. And then you build, a package around that. But who's to say that would be attractive on either end of it? Who's to say, we keep talking about the Clippers like looking for solutions. Let's bring in another guy who maybe will only play 50 games. I don't know. Like there's always these concerns about these things. And even Steve Ballmer's money, as you said, it's not just about whether he's willing to pay. It's about what that does in the competitive environment of a new CBA. And you talked about the frozen pick thing. I feel like that's worth spelling out. You go over that repeater or that the second apron, $17.5 million over the luxury tax line, and it encumbers your ability to trade your far future picks, right? Like maybe that's something that people aren't so aware of right now.
Yeah, someone sent me, Yahoo Sports has obtained a copy of the term sheet of the new CBA, but I haven't read it yet at all.
Okay.
I have a train ride to a bachelor party on Friday, tomorrow.
When are you like not going to bachelor parties and weddings at this point?
It is insane. I will say I have 4 weeks off after this weekend before my next wedding.
Wow.
Any type of wedding activity. Yeah. The problem is that I'm really good at staying in contact with people. And
it's a professional, it's an aid in your career, but also
it definitely is an aid in the career. Yeah. It's
a tax on your social life.
It's helped me put a roof over my head, and it's also made me spend over $10,000 a year in wedding stuff for sure. Thank you for that segue, or not segue, totally opposite of a segue, throwing us off track.
Non sequitur.
As I'm looking for a segue, non sequitur. There you go. Okay. Let's go back to our game of what is his trade value, where Chris Paul, first real, veteran, all-star, future Hall of Famer. I don't know if Bradley Beal's a future Hall of Famer, but Chris Paul definitely is.
My gut reaction is no, but we could take a closer look at the numbers in that another time. But yeah. CP3.
CP3. Look, I'm saying this on Thursday, June 15th. I'm ready to be proven wrong. But if Phoenix finds a team that wants to pay Chris Paul $30 million next season, that is a competitive team and a winning team, I am struggling to see it right now.
Mm-hmm.
From the same lens of the second tax apron scaries that every team is feeling, from the fact that he also is getting up there in age and having durability issues, plus seemed to be, at least from an eye test standpoint, and this is not necessarily my opinion, but reflecting the takes I've heard from pro personnel scouts around the NBA, a little bit of a drop off in production this season. I'm struggling to see a scenario. I'm working under the assumption that he gets waived. I don't know what happens after that. But let's speak in the hypothetical here because we're trying to figure out what these guys' trade values are. Considering that he's going to have 30 million owed if you trade for him next. I mean, because you're not trading for him just to waive him, unless you're San Antonio and or Houston or some team right now who's taking him into space just to waive him, and you're getting some type of compensation back from Phoenix that you like. But then again, Phoenix has no first round picks available to trade. They've got a couple of pick swaps, but like, do you want DeAndre Ayton? Like, I just, this is why I'm feeling disinclined to believe that a Chris Paul trade will happen, as I have to silence a call from someone I really want to answer this call for. But it's okay. I don't know. What do you really think Chris Paul's trade value could be at this moment?
Well, yeah, it's submarined by the reality that I think everybody kind of expects if you wait 2 weeks, he's going to be on the market, because his guarantee date for that $30.8 million is June 28th. And that's the reason we talked about this after one of the games. I think after the initial round of reporting on CP3 sort of started to come through, this whole thing is about being on the clock and trying to find a solution to where he goes next year before that guarantee date over the next couple of weeks.
June 28th.
Yep, June 28th is that date. And then so the initial reporting is all he's getting waived. It's waive and stretch. It's going to be, and maybe that's so he can come back at a lower number. Maybe it's so that he can get on the free agent market and go elsewhere. And then nothing. And then after, I think before Game 4 of the finals, Woj reported that there was like a flurry of trade calls to Phoenix. Mark Stein before Game 5 reports that like they hope to trade him before the 28th deadline.
They definitely do hope to trade him.
I'm sure they hope to, and I'm sure they're like the whether flurry is the appropriate descriptor for the I don't know, but I'm sure that there were calls. But the fact that the flurry and the hope have in the intervening days turned into not much, it sounds like, leads me to believe that the trade value is non-existent. Like, and through no fault of Chris Paul's own. Like, I think given their druthers, a lot of teams might even say we'd rather have, if the top two free agents on the point guard market are Kyrie Irving and Fred VanVleet, I think the argument, will probably be a number of teams who would say, I'd rather have Chris Paul next year or for the next 2 years than Kyrie Irving or Fred VanVleet. And depending on where they are as an organization, what their timeline is, all that kind of stuff, and just what you want out of the position. But if the argument is to get that, you have to give up real stuff up to $30.8 million, or up to $30 million in matching salary in the next 2 weeks, when maybe you might just have an opportunity to sign him for the over under being the taxpayer mid-level, 12.2 million, something like that. Then why would you? Why, if you, as a front office, would you say, I'm going to volunteer? I mean, I guess the only argument I could think of is to get ahead of the line, to avoid when he hits the open market, other teams that, maybe being able to jump into the fray. But if it's going to cost you like twice as much plus other assets to do that, I think, you could understand front offices saying like, let's just wait and make our pitch and, see where we can get him from there.
So as I keep an eye on the NFL world through a strictly fantasy football perspective, when Dalvin Cook got waived by Minnesota, and this happens all the time now, where like these superstar running backs, after they sign this big contract and the team has this kind of like electric, backup who they think they could maybe move to the top slot, or he's the one in a new timeshare, blah, blah, blah. These Pro Bowl players just get waived. DeAndre Hopkins just gets waived. And I've messaged my friends in certain fantasy chats like, hey, like NBA reporter here, like, how do these guys just get waived for, nothing? Like, they're valuable. And this is the most analogous situation I've ever seen in the NBA to that. The closest thing in the NBA to this is like at the trade deadline, why would I trade for this player when I think I could just sign him to a buyout?
Right. You're going to get rid of him in a week anyway.
Yeah. That's the closest thing to this from an NBA standpoint. Cause I mean, the flurry of calls, like I'm sure, I was told over a dozen teams made contact with Chris Paul's representation about bringing him in once he gets waived.
Right.
So,
and that's the big difference. As opposed to like, difference. Hey, let's come with our best offer to try to get you from Phoenix a week a week ahead of time.
Yeah. I'm sure the Suns are saying, hey, you got to jump the line. If you want him, he's going to have this huge market. Come get him.
Right.
But I don't know if he's worth $30 million at this point, especially under these new tax rules. And he's projecting the idea that Chris Paul really only wants to compete for a title here in the latter stage of his career, which makes sense.
And not for nothing, to your point, you said, the evaluation of pro personnel scouts. And I think probably that extends to a lot of other people too. The eye test on Chris Paul is like the version at age 37, 38 is just, it's not quite the same as it was 5 years ago, right? Or even 3 years ago. And the numbers back that up, 14 points, 9 assists, 4 rebounds, a steal and a half a game. Like, still great, but not Chris Paul in the way we think of him, right? 44% from the field. Yeah, exactly. 44% from the field. Not the same way we think about him. But
you're getting downgraded to like point profit. Is that how it works?
No. Once you get the nickname, it sticks with you. People just start saying it with a sneer and like a little bit,
I just
like,
did.
Yeah, right, exactly. So he's going to come for you next.
No disrespect to Chris Paul.
Cliff Paul is going to pop out from behind you and just comes, cut your throat. But like even a more diminished asset version of Chris Paul is still one of the better facilitators in the entire NBA. And so there will the idea that there will be a market for him is not surprising. It's just, is the market dramatically different from the ones that we've talked about for somebody like Kyrie or something, where it's like it's going to be like an LA team or, insert championship contender team here or nothing. And I think that's probably where this winds up. And my guess is, as you're suggesting, it's more likely after a waiving, after a stretching, and as opposed to like somebody just deciding they're going to fork over a whole bunch of assets in the next week and a half.
So 2-ish weeks ago, I was calling someone, just checking in, getting the early rumblings of things. And he said to me, Chicago would definitely move Zach LaVine. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Like, I'll file that away. And last week, someone, started to come up at the combine a little bit that, like keep an eye on Zach LaVine, whatever. But last night I had a team text me and say, hey, Chicago called us and asked us if we'd be willing to make an offer, if we'd want to make an offer for Zach.
And that's different.
And then I texted 2 other teams today. And one, they said yes. The other, they said no. So clearly this is not a widespread, we're just like calling around the league and shopping Zach LaVine. But from various other conversations I've had, I'm of full belief that if there's an offer that can come right now that can knock off Chicago socks and maybe clean up their cap sheet a little bit moving forward, maybe lower this team's ultimate ceiling but raise its floor, or raise its optionality, I guess, not opportunity, to figure out some different transactions to kind of build just a steady playoff threat here, because every franchise has different goals, right? Like, I don't think, I know that not every team has the championship as like their ultimate threshold of success. Some teams are just trying to make it to the playoffs and be somebody in that, like TV poster of what the postseason drama can, the 40 days and 40 nights of TNT. That was one of my favorite taglines over the years. So
and clock a couple gate receipts and maybe turn that into a tight little profit and then move on.
Like, the Bulls won 6 championships, man. Like, do they necessarily need to be? They're a global brand. I think just being in the postseason could be a pretty strong. Sacramento obviously has a high ceiling, but I wrote this in my feature when I went out there to visit the Kings last November. Like, the Kings would just be, fucking thrilled to be the Portland Trailblazers of the Damian Lillard era, where they make the playoffs 10 straight years and like they just know they're going to be in the playoffs. Right. Obviously, the goal there, they're not going to put a ceiling on things, but like they're not. I don't think. Oh shucks, Sacramento didn't build this like juggernaut. I don't think that's the end all be all there like it is in Philadelphia right now, and Boston and Miami and Denver at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know exactly what Chicago's looking for, but from my understanding, they want something super, super valuable, a haul. What I expect will be more than what they want. What I expect will be more than what Bradley Beal will ultimately net Washington. So I don't
Mm.
know if that's doable for the Bulls. I wonder if, he's someone that was flirting with the Trailblazers before he ended up re-signing with Chicago and having this 5-year deal that's now being a little bit more looked at with a side eye under these new CBA situations. I don't know if he's someone. I haven't checked with Portland yet on this. Like, I don't know if he's someone that is still like on their radar, but like the number 3 pick and Anthony Simons and Shaden Sharp, if that was something, and I've been told so far that Sharp is not someone the Blazers want to put into anything, but like if that were something that would get to put like on Chicago's radar, from everything I know, I would think the Bulls would have to think about something to
Oh,
that magnitude.
yeah. I think if
That's the
you're
kind of ballpark that we're talking about.
well, I mean, I can understand Chicago saying if we feel like we have the most, one of the most valuable assets that might be on the board, or somebody that could be a difference maker for an organization. Like I get that, but if my immediate reaction to that sort of spitball is like that is way too much for Portland to be giving up in that situation.
Yeah.
The
I
the
think that's where we're talking. I think Chicago wants something that's going to make the other team a little queasy to give up.
which, and I mean, you can understand from the Bulls' perspective. It's funny because you can look at it and say, well, the argument for moving off LaVine now is that it basically completely clears out your books, right? Like you had this plan of we're going to build around LaVine and DeMar and Lonzo and Nick Vucevic, and like that's going to be our core. And with Patrick Williams, hopefully he sort of pops and turns in, and I think that's what our core is going to be. And that obviously has not been what they'd hoped for in injuries. And obviously, like, so the devastating injury to Lonzo basically completely wrecked the plan there. But so then you wind up in a situation where like the same front office that made that choice would be looking at it and saying, well, let's clear the decks and make a new plan. And so you wonder, like, at what point do you stop getting to make the new plans? But if you were able to move off LaVine, that basically the only long-term money you'd have would be whatever you commit in like rookie scale extensions to Patrick Williams and like Dalen Terry in a couple of years. That's kind of it. Like everything else is pretty much crystal clear after the 2024-25 season. So from their perspective, I get it. If you're thinking, well, we're not going to be a championship caliber team with what we've got now, let's figure something else out. What LaVine is and what his value around the league is, it's a very similar conversation to Beal, right? Like the money is not as large and the age is not, he's a couple years younger. And so that theoretically has more value. We say, I think it's 129.1 guaranteed, $1 million guaranteed over the next 3 years, $49 million player option for 26-27 when he'll be 30 years old. 2 years younger than Beal, no trade clause. So like the contract is friendlier, such as it is in the context of a 5-year, $215 million contract. It's a little friendlier than what Beal's on. And there's also an argument to be made that of these sort of guys we're talking about, LaVine has the highest recent standard of play. Like after January 1st last year, he was averaging like 26 points a game, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, really strong shooting, over like 50% from the floor, 37 from the field, taking a ton of threes, generating a ton of free throws. Like there's an engine there. And the concerns that you had at the beginning of last season about how he was going to bounce back from his knee surgeries, like he seems to have answered that in the second half of last season. And so then you're saying all the arguments to be made for Beal gives you that secondary scoring punch. And like, if he's not a number one guy, then maybe that even plays up more in terms of his efficiency. You can say the same thing for LaVine. And we also just saw it at a higher clip on a team that was actually making the TM play-in push at the end of last season. But
Bulls.
your Bulls. But if you're saying the price is going to be higher than what somebody's going to pay for Beal, it's yeah, I don't know. Like, because when we talk about Beal being a fringe All NBA guy, is LaVine is more like fringe All Star as opposed to fringe All NBA, and so that gap is meaningful, especially if you're going to be we're cranking up the price even higher. And so I don't know. Part of me does wonder if we wind up in these situations where it's like there's a lot of rumblings about where these guys go, and then eventually everybody just blanches at the price tag and says, "Go make $200 million to stay in Philly or in Washington. Go make $200 million to stay in Chicago, and we'll see you guys in a year or two, maybe."
Yeah, I mean, it's very early. I think there's a really strong chance he doesn't get moved. I don't think me reporting this helps Chicago at all. Sorry, Bulls. But
so much for your Bulls, I suppose.
So much for my Bulls. But look, like if Chicago's actively calling around teams and asking what they want about this guy, like it's interesting. And we'll see if a team reaches their price. I don't know if they will. I mean, the Bulls don't know if they will, but it'll be something to monitor for sure. We also need to monitor what's happening in New Orleans and Philadelphia. We will touch on those particular situations when we get back from a quick break. Welcome back. No Cap Room, Ball Don't Lie Podcast Network. Dan Devine, Jake Fischer. We are here to dive now into the New Orleans Pelicans, where definitely last week, like late in the week, if I recall correctly, I'd started to hear some rumblings. Hey, the Pelicans really like Scoot, and they're willing to trade Zion to move up to 2 or 3. And that's like the rumor version of what the reality is, right? When you hear that, that's when you have to call some people and kind of peel back the layers of the onion and separate some fact from fiction. So what I know to be true is that the Pelicans did call Charlotte and they did call Portland at 2 and 3 respectively and said, hey, if there's an opportunity, we like Scoot and we will be aggressive in trying to get there. I think aggressive from the Pelicans standpoint, from a preference, is to use a lot of the surplus of draft capital that they acquired from the Lakers and acquired from Milwaukee for Anthony Davis and then Drew Holiday. I don't believe either Charlotte or Portland really is looking for that right now. The Blazers, seems far more straightforward in that they need to try to use this pick to bring back veteran talent that can move their overall ceiling closer to a championship around Damian Lillard, or else the thought, goes, and he's certainly floated it out there himself during various media appearances, he could potentially become one of these names that we're asking and debating what their trade value is. I think his would be higher than all 3 of the guys we just talked about. If we wanted
very much
kind of give a little teaser there. With Charlotte, they don't have a franchise guy like Damian Lillard who's gotten into the Western Conference Finals previously, who has been nothing but an exemplary steward of the franchise. But the Hornets, by all accounts, are expecting, with LaMelo Ball healthy, with whoever they take at number 2, or whatever return could come from that pick, although I'm fully expecting they stick at 2 and decide between Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller. Miles Bridges comes back. They seem like they're willing to match any type of realistic deal for PJ Washington. They want to bring back Dennis Smith Jr., to my knowledge. They think that crew, with hard-nosed defensive tactician Steve Clifford, should be able to make another TM play and push. I don't think they want to just move 2 for, like, let's say, just a package of, 13 and other picks. I don't think, and I'm just spitballing here for sure. Like, this is not something that New Orleans and Charlotte's talked about. Like, even Dyson Daniels, who went 8th last year, or 7th last year, 8th, yeah, 8th. Shane Sharp went 7. I don't think like him and 14 does it for Charlotte, because this is a team that wants to really take a step forward. Even though Dyson is a year removed from being it's not that far away from a rookie, but you get my point. So to get up there, the Pelicans would have to put Ingram and Zion on the table. From everything I've heard, I mean, Ingram seems like a non-starter. Although the Pelicans always talk about, I mean, this is like a thing that David Griffin says up top, and like everyone else kind of repeats like a little mantra in the Pelicans front office that no one's untouchable. But I think where Zion stands from his injury standpoint and the fact that he's got his own. I mean, there's a theme here in this show. All these big contracts that have injury or just like other downsides in this new salary landscape are, I think it's just every team's going to have to be considering moves like this, where even smaller moves, where, I think we're going to see a bunch of veterans traded on draft night, whether it's teams moving down to, get off some deals like rookie scale contracts in this new look at what Christian Brown just did for Denver. To have a playoff caliber player on a rookie scale contract is just going to be very, very helpful in all team accounting and roster construction. So to bring it back to New Orleans and Zion, I don't think they're moving him for 2 or 3. I think they're going to need a hell of a lot more back. If Zach LaVine, that haul for Chicago is like what we get there, juice is flowing. I would think it's a bit more for Zion, even with all the. And now we're really getting to the speculative weeds because to my knowledge, New Orleans is not that far from either, or is not that close with either Portland or Charlotte. I mean, not far in any conversation at all. I believe they were very quick conversations. So I don't know where this is headed. I'm not really expecting Zion's going to be a name that ends up, all right, Tuesday before the draft, Zion's on the like the Pelicans are taking their best off. Because that's the thing too that someone pointed out to me. If the Pelicans really were going to consider trading Zion, wouldn't you open it up as opposed to start offering things around? Wouldn't you do a little bit what Chicago's doing with Zach LaVine and say, hey, make us your best offer? Because Zion's also got a lot more cachet behind him than your average, big contract potential albatross that he could end up being. So I'm curious, Dan, in the spirit of the last conversation we were having, what is Zion's trade value? I honestly have no idea.
My one sort of counterpoint or the thing that when you said, wouldn't you open it up rather than just reaching out to those two teams? The two things about it that make me think about it is, one, if you are just like Scoot's the guy, if you are, if you've evaluated that and you've drafted, you've modeled everything and you said that's the guy, then you need to be a 2 or 3 to get him. So that's why you wouldn't open it up. You would say there. And then the other part of that is where you meant what you mentioned specifically about those two teams, about Portland and Charlotte. Like, what's the kind of player that we've kept talking about Portland never having for almost the entirety of Lillard's career? It's like a guy, like a legit playmaking 4, a guy who like in the front court you can be, so there was all the, could Draymond get there? Could Aaron Gordon get there? Could whoever, like, obviously Zion's a different kind of player, but megawatt front court talent to pair with Lillard seems to fit that idea of what Portland would need to move off of a pick to be able to, like, we're going to maximize the rest of Lillard's prime. As you said, Joe Cronin told you that back in May, the idea that that's what you would be looking for. You'd like, let's get a superstar caliber player to pair with Dame, ideally one who is not like a 6'3" guard, and we could put up in the front court. So from that perspective, that makes sense. And then the Charlotte thing, it's a kind of a facile analysis, but he's a Jordan Brand guy, and like if you were going to try to pick out who would maybe be likely to overlook the fact that Zion's played 114 games in 4 years and just look at, but he's a star, it's the guy in Carolina who is signing his shoe checks, right? Like, there's something to be said for why those two teams would be the ones that you would target in that capacity. That said, what is Zion Williamson's trade value? I think our producer John Gennaro, when we were sort of going over this, made the comparison, or at least posed the framework of what the Knicks got for Kristaps Porzingis from the Mavericks when he was coming off the ACL tear, and the counter, or which was some sort of not great, like salary filler essentially. Dennis Smith Jr. as a down sort of distressed asset of a former lottery pick, and then a couple
I'm
of
interrupting you and just saying more. It's
yeah,
more
of
than
course,
that.
yeah, yes, I think like dramatically more, because even if like Kristaps when healthy an all-star, Zion when healthy is like a supernova. Like he's like has already I think already
They were the
made all
best
NBA.
team in the West when he was healthy this year, this
Yeah.
very season.
And I don't remember. I now forgive me for not having done this part of the research a little while ago, but like I don't remember if he made All NBA a few years ago. I know I voted for him for All NBA a couple of years ago, but his last like fully healthy or mostly healthy season. But he's that level, like down ballot MVP candidate the first 2.5 months of last season before everything kind of the bottom fell out in New Orleans. So
according to Basketball Reference, no All NBA team for Zion.
Okay, so then I think I had him on third team the year that Randall made it. Maybe that's what it was. Like he didn't have enough games played and they were a bad team or whatever. But like that's the level of player he is, and so it's more. It's not filler and like meh first rounders. It's a real first rounder or multiple real first rounders and or real young talent, and so that's why those two teams at the top of the draft make more sense. Setting aside all the other stuff that Zion's been in the news for of late, and
I have no idea what you're talking about. No
and
clue.
the headaches that may or may not come along with that. Just purely as an on-court proposition, it is a gigantic gamble because you need the feeling that he's going to be able to be healthy enough and stay on the court enough to be able to make it worth your while. But the Pelicans can say, we're not just going to give him up for 50 cents on the dollar because of the flexibility, the health and flexibility concerns. Like, what he is when he's out there, which is like basically a condensed Shaq, and you can't put a price tag on that, or if you could, it's going to be an awfully steep one.
All right, the vibes in New Orleans are a little weird,
maybe rancid right now, like not ideal, not a great set of circumstances.
That's your word, not mine. That's your word, not mine. The vibes in Philly are, we'll use torn. I feel like
bifurcated, moving in multiple directions at the same time.
Because look, there's a lot of different scenarios that can unfold for many teams, but the Sixers are going to be living in a world with James Harden or without James Harden. Mm-hmm. That's really it. Like, if he walks out the door, I don't think the Sixers are going to be like super aggressive trying to use Tobias Harris to go get someone else. Like, I mean, sorry. I don't think they're going to be able to do anything more than that. Like, I don't think they're going to be attaching Maxey and like a 2030 first round pick to go do that as one team.
Tobias Harris, by the way, $39.2 million expiring contract, which on one level, you're just like, woof, $39.2 million for Tobias Harris. But as we've been talking about in this new CBA environment, the idea of that you could wipe $40 million off your books by hosting that deal for a year might be a lot more attractive to a lot more teams than it would have been this time last year.
I could see a team like Indiana that's young and has space and would think about bringing him back right now, bringing him in to like bring him back at a lower number later. Ironically, I always use David West to the Paul George Indiana Pacers as an example of like a sturdy veteran that can come help a young core. Maybe the new age version is Al Horford in Boston, but that's not the same because Horford was like there first and they brought him back. Like usually like marquee free agent sign, like veteran free agent, or, Paul Millsap going to Denver back with the, early Jokic era Nuggets. Tobias could essentially be something like that for this young Pacers group that's been looking for a power forward, at all times. But that's not necessarily bringing anything back for Philly. That's dramatically bringing back Buddy.
Yeah, you don't think they're getting Halliburton for that?
No, like Buddy Hield and stuff. I don't know if that really moves the Sixers ceiling that much further when Tobias has been there and been in the locker room and like someone super respected by everyone in that organization. I don't think the Sixers are going to panic and like try to go sign and trade him for Fred VanVleet or try to go move Maxey for LaVine. I think if Harden does walk, I think they got a couple of things up their sleeves that they're thinking about, but it's not like sky is going to be falling and they're going to, um, you know, try to go star hunting like Daryl always does. The whole like what the cliche word would be about what the Sixers should do. So that's just my intro of like Harden, post Harden, Harden, no Harden. That's kind of the way I'm looking at the scene, the feels in Philadelphia right now. I mean, they got a new head coach, Nick Nurse. He's definitely traveling around, visiting with team players from what I've heard, trying to start building some rapport. Seems like people are liking him so far. The folksiness, the music, kitschiness is going over well. So that's good to hear. But I mean, I don't know how much the like Jokic walking his way to a title narrative stuff is going to impact their like internal stuff over there. Like I know it's fun to think about and like, oh, Embiid's down bad right now and he should be embarrassed and like his MVP got totally overshadowed and blah blah. I don't think that's something they're really concerned with over there right now. That's just not my sense. I could see why, but I don't know. I feel like the Sixers are kind of operating in their own, like that's our own circus that we need to figure out how to organize.
Yeah, you're right. From the outside, you look at it and say, well, who wound up in the finals? And it was Jokic, who is, Embiid's perennial counterpoint in the MVP discussion, and Jimmy, the one that got away, right? Tobias Harris over me, etc. So that doesn't look good. The optics are not great from Philly, setting aside the fart.
Also, Haywood Highsmith. Losing
right?
Haywood Highsmith.
Sixers legend Haywood Highsmith starting in the finals, who would have thought? But when you move that, or especially you tack that onto just how sad the Sixers went out in game 6 and 7 against Boston. The vibe not elite in that moment, but you're right. It all does really boil down to like does Harden stay or go? If Harden stays, yes, Nick Nurse is there, and he was like a fresh set of eyes from outside the organization to maybe take a different look at how they build that team. But it's essentially going to be the same team or a very similar version of the team. If Harden's there, I don't think they're going to, it's stylistically, roster construction wise, I don't think it's going to be dramatically different. I think they would hope for a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more creativity in terms of how they maximize those guys. And then like another step forward for Maxey, maybe that levels up what the offense can be in the moments where Embiid's off the floor or where Harden's off the floor, that kind of stuff. I think you're basically taking the same team and just hoping for, incremental improvement off of it. And if Harden's gone, it is almost entirely based to me on if he's going to go, can Daryl Morey turn him into something in a sign and trade and be able to, what he gets back from that deal goes a long way toward determining what the next iteration of the Sixers looks like. And then the next question from there is the ball in Maxey's hands all the time? Is Tyrese Maxey now your starting point guard of the future? Not even of the future, of the right now. And so to your point, when you say like, I don't think they're going to put him in a deal for Zach LaVine, I don't know that there's anybody outside of like the MVP ballot that Philly would put Tyrese Maxey in a deal for. I think they kind of
snapping on the mic sound good.
It sounds like, I think like this, they kind of view that as like sky's the limit, and he's already improved so much in a couple of years, and sort of the next leap for him, which I think that they feel pretty confident in him getting, is like he's going to be an all-star. That's what they kind of think. So if that's the case, does that start now? If Harden's gone, do you just say, go ahead, now you're going to run the 30 pick and rolls a game. Now you're going to be the one who we're staggering off of Embiid, and you're going to run the second unit. And then maybe he takes his lumps. Maybe that's a step back for the team in the short term, but then provides them more, more information, more reps, more understanding of what that team can be moving forward. I think that's the big swing, though. The big decision capacity there is, if you bring Harden back, how do you improve around the margins of this team? If you don't bring Harden back, is Maxey the future? And then, you mentioned, there's two things I wanted to ask quickly. One, I know you'd report there had been sort of this rumblings, and I know you had reported that it was in the air around the combine, the notion that like the Harden and CP3 things could be interconnected. Has there been any sort of movement in that idea, or is that kind of just sort of still like an ambient thing hanging around?
It's a good question. I am operating with the belief that for Harden, it's between Houston and Philly. I don't think Harden makes any sense for the Suns.
Right.
I don't think Chris Paul makes any sense for Philly.
And then the other thing is, I know from your reporting and some other reporting around the Beal situation that Philly is, that's sort of a no go at this point. If you are trying to figure out a thing to do with Tobias Harris's $39.2 million expiring contract, and you no longer have James Harden, you allow Washington to wipe that deal off. Maybe it's Tobias and whatever future pick or something like that. Jaden Springer, sorry, Mike Levin, sorry that we would be moving him in the deal, but like whatever it would wind up being, maybe that's a pathway to go down. But I know from your understanding, that's more of a far-fetched approach for Philly in the Tobias Harris or in the Bradley Beal discussion.
I mean, our producer John Denaro wanted to know about the likelihood of a sign and trade for Kyrie with Tobias.
Yeah, also with that huge expiring.
Which, like, I think Dallas, to my understanding, has been a team that's checked in on Tobias in the past. But, and in my reporting, I always try to bring context from past transaction cycles to try to provide some clues to what could happen now, because that's just how this economy works. But with Dallas, they're really in a pre and post Kyrie world. Like all the Zach LaVine stuff that was out there last summer is gone now. They can't go get Zach. They gave up what they would have given to get Zach to go get Kai. Right. So that would also take Kyrie like changing course and wanting to go to Philly and Philly wanting him. But by all accounts, Kyrie wants to go back to Dallas. I just think with Nick Nurse coming into the fold, no matter what happens with Harden, there is a hope in Philly that there can be a change in approach on offense and maybe on defense too, to try to maximize what Embiid's ceiling can be, what Maxi's ceiling can be next to him. And I think Philly wants to bring back Paul Reed too. I would think that they definitely have interest, to my knowledge, in bringing back George Niang and Jalen McDaniels, depending on the price tags for both those guys. I mean, those guys are completely in that ballpark of like, are we getting the mid-level or are we getting a lot less? Like that's kind of what the landscape's going to be for a lot of those people. But I don't think the Sixers are doing rocket science right now. I think there are tons of teams who are super active in their, like Atlanta. Atlanta's a team I'll probably write about.
We have to acknowledge the pun of not doing rocket science at a time where their main guy is trying to decide whether he wants to stay in Philly or go to Houston. We at least have to acknowledge the connections there.
There you go. So, but a team like Atlanta that I plan to write about tomorrow, they could go 17,000 different directions with John Collins and Clint Capella and DeAndre Hunter. And there are teams who would definitely line up to trade for DeJounte Murray if they really earnestly talked about him. Like there's so much more that could happen in Atlanta, where the fact you got Murray's deal coming up and Sadiq Bey and Onyeka Okongwu are both extension eligible this summer. Like there's a whole lot more variables and a lot of other teams in Philadelphia. The Sixers just have higher stakes than most.
Right. So we can check the vibes in Atlanta next week, but for right now, I think it's fair to say that the vibes in Philadelphia are uncertain. There's a lot that's resting on James Harden being torn and what decision he makes as a result of that. But for right now, it's like for a team that has the reigning MVP that's won 50 games a bunch of years in a row, that is excited about its new head coach, and that has like a reasonable belief that it can be a title contender. You'd think the vibes would be a little bit steadier than this.
Yeah, next week the vibes we'll check will be NBA draft related. That's going to do it for us here on this week's episode of No Cap Room. We'll have Kristen Peak back with another edition of On the Clock, and I'm going to be on there. I'm going to be the guest with Kristen Peak. Vinny Goodwill, Good Word with Goodwill, they're going to be off on Monday, and we will be back on Friday, as the current stand is now, to recap all the action that took place at Barclays Center, although neither of us will be at Barclays Center, even though we are within a stone's throw away. So yeah, that's the plan. That's what we got coming for you in the future. We appreciate what you came for today. Thanks to John Gennaro for doing all the things he does to make the show look and sound great, for putting up with all the coughing I did that none of our listeners are going to hear. It was really bad. The Mucinex wore off probably around the 45-minute mark of taping this. Follow us on Twitter at Jake L. Fisher, at Your Man Devine. Please subscribe to the Ball Don't Lie feed on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you're currently listening on, and give us a 5-star review. That'd be great. We thank you for listening, and we would love it if you came back next week for another edition of No Cap Room on the Ball Don't Lie podcast network.